Palm Sunday is a bittersweet occasion. Even the most restrained of congregations make quite a song and dance about it. We wave branches about. We venture outside our buildings for once. We are upbeat, joyful, celebratory. But at the same time, we know, like any pantomime audience, what menace lurks just out of the hero's sight, awaiting an opportune moment. At the climax of his adult ministry, Jesus makes a calculated entrance to the holy city. As his own people are marking God's rescue of their ancestors centuries ago from slavery in Egypt. Their descendants are presently living under another alien empire's control, albeit at home. Many are fervently, if discreetly, hoping for liberation. Apart from religious circles, very little power remains to the indigenous populace. The Romans, who've been in charge for several decades, tolerate their subjects' peculiar practices. They make allowances for the traditional institutions, but it's still an uneasy relationship. Anything that rocks the boat could prove damaging. Unrest among the Jews or threats of insurrection might mean a serious crackdown with undesirable consequences. Jesus' rather mysterious presence, then, will not be universally welcomed. Pretenders. If your Holy Scripture promises a Messiah, that's what you're bound to get. Some egomaniac who believes he's superhuman, God's gift. Chuck in a dash of religious fervour. Stir, well, recipe for disaster. We knew he was coming. The markets and the squares were abuzz with it all, even ahead of that fateful day. If you'd never heard of Jesus the Galilean, you soon would. There were no end of stories about his remarkable insights, still more about the magic. He fed a multitude from a couple of sandwiches, made a crippled man or several walk, gave some blind beggar 20/20 vision, and even lately bringing a dead man back to life. Clearly, you don't want to believe everything you hear in the bazaar, but people are so gullible. They do hark back to the good old days too, when David, this one's ancestor supposedly, was the best king our country's ever had, when we were nobody's slaves. The nationalists, they were looking for a cause, and this poor man's friend, with the common touch, was just the job. Perfect timing too, of course. The city was always at its busiest over Passover. We were celebrating our national identity after all. The key watershed moment, the making of Israel. The wondrous work of God. Well, yes, indeed. But divine intervention for his chosen, his very own people, remember? Romans, who? A mere bump in the road for God's best friends. We knew he was coming, as I said. But we'd never foreseen him pulling quite such a stunt. That junior donkey, masterstroke, and the East Gate. Every faithful Jew knew what that meant. Behold your king coming to you on a lowly donkey, and boy, was that lowly. His feet were practically dragging along the ground. What a commotion! Doubtless his camp followers had been whipping up interest, passing the word, and those palm branches. The tongue is a fire, you know. His publicity machine was on a roll, even if, well, you'd never mistake them for some paramilitary group. was up on the roof terrace when I heard them first. Oh, yes, I'm a priest. But it wasn't my turn for temple duties. Just as well. My house was very near to the gate. I came down then and loitered on the steps. It was quite a crush. Folks up trees or bagging any suitable vantage point. Our alternative rabbi could barely make headway up the street. Haven't seen such a carnival in years. There was clearly an appetite for that sort of celebrity. Godly pretensions. So much the better. An Israelite with the only worthwhile credentials now, religion. Practically the only arena where we had a degree of autonomy. The governor, prefect, pilot, wanted to keep us sweet, however incompatible we were. If this Jesus did turn out to be trouble, you could be sure the Romans would want rid of him as soon as we did. Preserve the status quo, I think they'd say. So they headed straight for the temple. His lot, where else? The Lord whom you seek will suddenly come to his temple. But it wasn't his. It was God's. God's home on earth. I did wonder how the Nazarene would feel about having the sacrifice merchants in-house. Plenty of old-school worshippers got worked up about that, you know, but Caiaphas, well, he was the high priest, and what he said went. It was far more convenient, if not exactly sweet-smelling. The upstart's arrival, well, that was a little bit of a wake-up call, really. Time to survey things afresh, highlight cracks or imperfections. Like any royal visit. But they never last. They're just passing through. Apart from a quick spring clean, they don't change anything much. And this one, this king, he would have been deposed in a trice. I still felt a little uneasy as I saw him go by. Big chunks of the prophet's writing surfaced, unbidden in my mind. He wasn't much to look at, Jesus, and he was so silent amid all the hubbub, even when he was popular. He reminded me of nothing so much as that sheep silent before its shearers. Isaiah said that God's innocent servant would bear the guilt of the people. We all know they only ever think of themselves. Fickle as any mob, anywhere. Maybe then this was God's scapegoat and not his anointed king. It was, however, the only time I have ever seen a sheep taking itself to market. Action to ensure the integrity of Jewish religious practices could easily be justified by those in charge, but had the temple become less the Holy of Holies and more a kingdom of the world, like the Roman Empire or any other seat of power, perhaps its worship was no longer in spirit or truth, as Jesus had implied to Nicodemus, a senior member of its hierarchy. Jesus was just one individual, but personal followings all too easily get out of hand. Nipping this danger in the bud, in Jerusalem itself, might prevent disastrous consequences for many more. For the establishment, both sacred and secular, he appeared to be a threat. But in Jesus, God was communicating something new, not just to that particularly receptive people, the Jews, but to all humanity. The stakes were far higher than for ordinary secular matters. But that was not something his opponents, nor probably even his supporters, could see from there. Jesus' entry into anyone's life ought to cause a disturbance. It should bring us to reevaluate what we say and do, even the things we consider to be set in stone and beyond challenge. Who, then, might we genuinely roll out the red carpet for? Welcoming this rather unlikely-looking monarch involves looking afresh at how we interact with his world, even if that means permanent change.